Hello and welcome to this video that is going to go through the unseen poetry questions 1 and 2. They're on literature paper 2, so you will have done a question on inspector calls for 45 minutes. You'll have about 5 minutes to plan and answer and then about 40 minutes to write. Then you will have done a 45-minute power and conflict poetry question, again 5 minutes to kind of plan and answer, 40 minutes to write. And then you'll have 45 minutes to do the unseen poetry question. So this will be a poem that you've not seen before for question 1, and then you'll have to compare that to another poem you've not seen before for question 2. Just a couple of things before we kind of look at analysing the poems and questions. First thing to say is obviously in that 45 minutes, we recommend you spend about 35 minutes on question 27.1. It's worth 24 marks, so obviously it's worth more marks, so spend longer on that. And we reckon you spend about 5 to 10 minutes on 27.2, which is worth 8 marks there as well. Just a couple of things on the actual poems themselves. Obviously it could be anything, but please bear in mind that English literature is an untiered exam. So what we mean by that is there will be something that students who are going to get a grade 1 can access alongside something that students who are going to get a grade 9. There is no higher tier or foundation tier. Everyone is given the same poem and same poem for question 2 as well, and it will be something that is accessible there. If you are looking for a grade 9, if you're looking for, to try and get your 24 out of 24, you are looking for layers of meaning within this poem. You're looking for kind of surface level of meaning really to a certain grade, and then obviously anything above kind of, grade 5s, grade 6, grade 7s, 8s, 9s. You're looking to look at layers of meaning within this poem, and often that's how the poem changes from start to finish there as well. So that's a little overview of the unseen section. So we say you should probably spend about 35 minutes on this question on 27.1. That's 5 minutes planning and then about 30 minutes writing an answer for your 24 marks. And then once you've done that, and this for some of you will be the last ever question of English literature you do, because it's the last question on GCSE literature paper 2, 27.2 will be 10 minutes for 8 marks. Please bear in mind that you will be tired in this exam. It's a 2-hour 15-minute exam. You haven't got the luxury of 15 minutes reading and planning time as you have for literature paper 1 on Macbeth and Frankenstein. You've got to just get in and read and plan as you go through the questions. So what we're going to do is try and help you with a few tips that should make the most of that time here. So the first thing to do is just remember the 5 steps we use when we're approaching an unseen poem. Obviously you don't know what the poem is going to be about. It will be something accessible for all students, but it could be about anything, and it has been in the past as well. Whatever it's about, we recommend you follow these 5 steps here. First of all, step 1 is to explore the connotations of the title. Second, step 2 is to read the poem at least twice. The first time you read through the poem, you are looking for the surface level meaning, basically what is this poem actually about, and the second time is for any deeper meanings or layers of meaning within that, or how a writer or a persona feels. Step 3, step 4 and step 5 you can kind of start doing together. Step 3 is consider the meaning of the poem, so you've kind of done that a little bit in step 2, and you're looking for the poet's ideas. What is the poet trying to get across with this poem at the beginning, middle and end of the poem? It's only really in step 4 where you analyse the poet's use of language and structure. And what we mean by step 4 is you're starting to think about which 2 or 3 or 4 quotations am I actually going to use from this poem to form the basis of my answer. And step 5 is what is the effect on the reader? How are we supposed to respond to this poem as a reader? That doesn't need to be as explicit as it makes the reader feel ... You can do that through exploring layers of meaning there as well. So let's have a little look at the poem. Obviously, before we look at any poems in literature, we look at the question. The question gives us a lens, and it should basically help us understand what this poem's about. In Shoulders, how does the poet, which is Naomi Shihab Nye, so we can call her Nye, present ideas about the importance of protecting and taking care of each other? So we know that this poem, even if we're unsure, we know this poem is going to be in some way about protecting and taking care of each other. I'm just going to write a few notes just to help us. So we've probably got about 5 minutes to plan, and then we've got about 30 minutes to write 3 to 4 point evidence analysis paragraphs. So the reason they are not context, obviously some of the poems you might get, there might be a little bit of context you can read into that, but the reason it's not context is because you've not seen this before. Unlike Frankenstein, where you can study the socio-historical context, unlike the poetry where you understand a little bit about particularly the war poems, there is no context to this. You've not had a chance to study that. So it's just, you get your marks for analysis. And in analysis in particular is your ability to explore layers of meaning. And we will go through this with you now. So the first point to start, just putting this here, and this is great for your revision, just go through these steps, is to look at the title. Don't spend too long on this. I'm highlighting it just because why not? Shoulders. How does the poet present the importance of protecting and taking care of each other? The title might give you some information, it might not. Shoulders here obviously used to support the head. Now that may or may not be useful. That's the first thing I can think of when I think of shoulders. That's why I've got a pair of shoulders in my body. They can be used to carry people. My toddler, for instance, will often ask to be carried on my shoulders. There's a phrase, I think there's an old Oasis album as well, about standing on the shoulders. I think the phrase is standing on the shoulders of giants there. But at the moment, that title hasn't given me too much away there, particularly in terms of protecting and taking care of each other. I'm getting nothing from that poem. It's not like the poem's called Look After Each Other, it's just giving me shoulders at the moment, which isn't massively helpful. Sometimes you might get a really helpful title, sometimes you won't. Step 2, read the poem at least twice. I'm going to discipline myself. I'm just going to look at the poem first of all, and then what I am going to do is, you'll notice I'm not going to highlight anything, I'm just going to read it. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ear fills up with breathing, he hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling. Right, okay, so I've read the poem once. Based on my initial reading, I'm getting the picture there's a man with a son on his shoulder crossing the road in the rain. And the son is very important, and he can hear the son asleep on him. And then towards the end of the poem, there's a little bit of a wider message here for society. So we move away from the man and the boy to, we basically need to look after each other here. But I'm just going to read it again. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south because his son is asleep on his shoulder. Okay, so there's a man crossing the road, it's raining, the son's on his shoulder. Surface level meaning, fine. Shoulders, obviously he is carrying a little person. That's fine. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. So the dad's being protective of the son. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. So he's making a link between his son and a parcel. Okay, I don't quite get that, but there we go. His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. Interestingly, obviously, he's got his son on his shoulders. His son's clearly breathing in his ear, whether he's gone to sleep. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. Whether that's the son or the man, I don't know. That's an area of meaning that I could explore for layers of meaning. And then we've got this little sermon here. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide and the rain will never stop falling. So actually we go back to the rain at the end of the poem, and actually life's going to get worse and worse for us here. So let's have a little look and a little pick apart of this poem. First of all, now consider the meaning of the poem and identify the poet's ideas. I like to write on the side, and I like to write this idea of surface and deeper meaning. And I think this is really important. Some people can only talk about the surface meanings of a poem, what's this is literally about. To get more marks, explore layers of meaning or meanings of what's going on. So on the surface, we've got a man carrying his son in the rain. And deeper meanings, this is a metaphor for how we should treat each other. You've also got, towards the end of the poem, thinking about deeper meanings, a bit of a kind of a message, almost like a lecture, to be honest, to reader. Now, this is where, that's the meaning, that's what this is about. Now what I want to do is I want to pick out, I've only got 30 minutes, so I've only really got time to write 3 to 4 paragraphs, so I'm looking for 3 to 4 quotations, and I think it's really important to quote from across the poem. So let's have a little look here. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south because his son is asleep on his shoulder. Okay, that's what's literally going on. No car must splash him, no car drive too near his shadow. I picked these 2 out. First of all, you've got the repetition of no car, no car. You've got 2 short declarative sentences there. This is quite direct. It shows the sense of how the man, the father, is protecting the son at all costs, to the point, that he is, no car must splash him. Fair enough, no one likes being splashed. No car drive too near to his shadow. He's not even protecting the sun, he is protecting its shadow. Is this father a bit too overprotective? Because obviously, fair enough, you don't want a car to drive near your son. You know, I get a bit like that with my children, or particularly my toddler. You know, come away from the road. You don't want them to be hit by a car, obviously. But here, the shadow is very, very different. It's like he doesn't want them to get close even to their shadow in case there might be any harm. So is this father a little bit overprotective? So I've got my first paragraph there because I've got this repetition of no car, no car. Cars are obviously dangerous. That's the meaning. That's why the poet Nye includes that there. Don't want to get splashed, but also don't want to drive near this shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo. I quite like that phrase. Might talk about that. But he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. I could talk about this, I suppose, this idea that he's treated like a little parcel. You see that often on fragile parcels, don't you? His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. I really like that line of the poem. I'll explain that in a minute. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide and the rain will never stop flooring. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 quotations there that I'm going to talk about this poem. The world's most sensitive cargo. Cargo is a really interesting noun choice to describe your son. It's also a metaphor. You'd like to think the son is being delivered anywhere by Amazon, but who knows. This idea, he's the world's most sensitive cargo. He's talking about a child. Children are sensitive. They're sensitive in the point they are quite vulnerable, but they're also sensitive in the point that they haven't been changed by mankind. Children often represent hope for the future. They haven't been kind of changed, or their behaviour hasn't been changed by mankind. So they're sensitive in that respect. They're sensitive in the case they're vulnerable. They could easily be splashed or injured, but also they're sensitive in the case that they haven't been changed or altered by mankind, and therefore they represent hope for us for the future. If we're talking about taking care of each other, we can learn a lot from our children. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. We can talk about this. It almost makes him feel like a parcel or a piece of cargo, something to be delivered. I've seen a lot of analysis on this, and I understand why people have picked it out, but I don't really feel there's an awful lot to say more apart from that as well. This idea, maybe you should handle with care as the father does, but maybe we should handle other people with care. This is where I'm going to start exploring my layers of meaning. So think about meanings in depth, not just what's going on the surface, but any of these things here. So we've got here, his ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream, which is his son asleep, but deep inside him. Now I like this. Him is the narrator. Naomi Shihab-Nye, bear in mind, is a woman, so she's writing about a man crossing the street in the rain. This is the narrator of the poem. Is this deep inside the narrator? Is it the narrator is a child? Who obviously used to be able to protect and take care of each other when he was kind of innocent or free. Because please bear in mind, he doesn't want cars to drive too near to his son's shadow. He is quite overprotective here. You know, I sometimes, obviously, when a car drives too close and I've got my children, I might say something I regret. I might say, you know, well, back off a little bit. Come on, go away. And this is the whole point, isn't it? Deep inside him, we should actually we should take care of each other. We should protect each other, even the people driving the car here. So this idea of this being deep inside of him, this need to protect. Is it the son as well? Is it the idea that the son can teach his father to be kind? And that's the kind of wider metaphor. You know, young children can teach us lots and lots of things. They, with the greatest respect to kind of year 11s watching this video, they believe very much in black and white behaviour. It's a case of something is right or wrong, and they will tell people when behaviour is wrong. They are perfectly happy to do that, and we can learn from them. We can learn how to protect and take care of each other from younger children, like the sun on the shoulders. And if we can't do this, the road will only be wide and the rain will never stop falling. And this is metaphorical. This idea, the rain will never stop falling. Life is going to be difficult. For everyone. If we can't be more like the man carrying his son, and if we can't be more like the son who represents innocence there. You know, you can think of particular examples in the world where people aren't behaving the way they should. You think of examples in life when people do things they shouldn't do. And this idea that if we behave like the man looking after his son, if we behave in a good way, then ultimately life will be fine. We should take care of each other, because if we don't, the rain will never stop falling. And obviously the rain is a metaphor for all the problems the world faces. And it's funny because it goes back to the start where it is raining at the start. So it's clear that we haven't learned our lesson as humanity there as well. So that's what we've got. We've looked through this, and what we've kind of done there is step 3, step 4 and step 5. When it says analyse the poet's use of language and structure, you just need to analyse writers' methods and explore what they mean. That can be language, it can be structure, it can be form. You don't have to preclude yourself. What sometimes we get is lots of students making kind of pretty silly blank points about structure that don't actually say anything. So this poem, if you look, there is no rhyme scheme to this poem. Rain, south, shoulder, him, shadow, cargo, marked, fragile, care. There's nothing there. And sometimes students write things in their answer. Nye writes the poem in blank verse, full stop. And the whole point is AQA changed the mark scheme to focus on writers' methods, which can be language, which is mainly language. Most people analyse language well. You'll notice this is most of that, to avoid blank statements like that, because ultimately people pick out a rhyme scheme, or they say it's in blank verse, but they don't actually say how that links to the meaning of the poem there. And everything you're doing should be linked to meaning. What is this poem about? What methods in the poem show this? And obviously the other thing to say is, in the exam, pick out what you can pick out. You know, the pressure's off a little bit. This is what I would say in my answer, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's about what you want to say. And then when you're writing it up, I'll have a little go. Obviously I know handwriting's not the best here, but I'll write on the bottom here. So the question is, you should always answer the question. So it's Nye presents the importance of protecting each other through the metaphor of a father and son. That would be my introduction. You don't necessarily need one. It's quite nice to show an examiner straight off the bat that you know what this poem is about and you know it contains a metaphor, but you get your marks for your ability to explore what the poem's about through layers of meaning, through making 3 to 4 points, picking appropriate and brief evidence, and then analysing that evidence in depth there as well. So essentially what I would get straight on into is your analysis. So at the beginning of the poem, the father is overprotective. So you're just basically saying what's going on at the start of this poem. At the beginning of the poem, the father is overprotective. The question asks about each other, as many parents and people can be in life. And then I've got my no car, must... ... And that's when I'm doing my analysis. That's when I pick out my words. So the repetition of no car suggests that the father doesn't want any car to come anywhere near him. Cars, I'm using my single word analysis. Cars obviously are a noun that pose a threat. They can harm people, but the father is so concerned he's even worried about the shadow, in inverted commas, of his son being harmed, you know, showing that he's potentially overprotective there, as well as being a caring father. Then what I'd go on, I'd do one in my middle. As the poem progresses, Nye looks at how the son is described as the most sensitive cargo. Cargo seems a strange metaphor on the surface to describe the son as a parcel, shows perhaps desensitised, but actually he's described as the world's most sensitive cargo. Sensitive could mean the son's vulnerable. For instance, he's vulnerable because he hasn't grown yet fully, so he is exposed and could be at risk of the danger of these cars. But also, sensitive could also show that he is sensitive and he's open to change because he hasn't yet been changed by mankind as a young child. He's not fully aware of the ways of the world and some of the bad things going on, which represents hope for the future and taking care of each other as well. And obviously you could even make a point about the fact that, you know, he's perhaps sensitive in inverted commas because he's got a father who clearly cares about this son as well and carries him on his shoulder there as well. And the fact that he keeps him kind of asleep, is that a metaphor for keeping him innocent from the world? It doesn't really matter which quotations you're doing, but you must pick quotations that allow you to explore layers of meaning and meaning in depth. And then you spend about half an hour writing that up into 3 to 4 point evidence analysis paragraphs. So you should have written up an answer to question 1. You should spend about 30 minutes. Obviously, just bear in mind that when you're writing, same for a lot of things really, there might be 1 or 2 paragraphs that are longer than others. You're getting your marks for your ability to explore and respond to the question, so the question drives everything, and then also you're getting your marks for exploring layers of meaning, analysing techniques within this poem, So when you've done that, that's 30 minutes, and in the last 10 minutes of your 2-hour, 15-minute exam, you've got a comparison question. Every exam board has to do this. There is a requirement from Ofqual that all exam boards do comparison of unseen poetry. It seems a little bit cruel to get you comparing 2 things that you've not seen before, but it's a requirement from Ofqual. AQA do this at the end of the exam paper and they make it worth 8 marks there as well. You should spend about 10 minutes on this. This should be about 2 to 3 minutes planning and then kind of about 7 to 8 minutes writing. This question is only really looking at assessment objective 2, which is kind of what we call analysis really, but it's analysis of writers' methods, and I'm going to put this in capital letters. It doesn't matter what method you pick out, but you must pick out methods that the writer uses, whether that is verbs or adjectives, whether this is similes or metaphors, whether it is to do with kind of rhyme or blank verse or whatever it is. You must talk about methods and you must compare the effects. And to get your 8 out of 8 marks, it must be what we call an exploratory comparison. In 10 minutes, you've probably got time to write 2 or 3 paragraphs, short comparison paragraphs. One of the things that's come out of the examiner reports as well is that you will use a format of both, both, however. So you write a paragraph about what both poems do, and you look at the question to help you when you're comparing the poem. Use the focus of the question. What else do both poems do, and what does one poem do differently from the other one? Let's have a look at the question first. In both Choices and Shoulders, the poets present ideas about protecting and taking care of things around us. That helps us because we can have a quick look at the question 27.1, and I think it does work having them both next to each other like this. Obviously in your exam board it'd be a bit annoying if they're there, but hopefully they'll be on pages where you can easily reach and see. So protecting and taking care of things around us. The good thing about this, and the reason it takes 10 minutes, is because you've just spent 35 minutes planning and writing an answer about a poem where they take care of each other, where you've analysed methods. So you're just looking for a couple of methods, 2 to 3 methods from this poem that could go into your answer to 27.2. The other thing is the poem, what are the similarities and or differences between the methods? This is the question, and it'll always be this format. The difference is this poem, second poem, will be relatively short, relatively easy. You haven't got the time to do the 5 steps there. You can do some of them. You just need to read it, get the meaning relatively quickly, and find some methods in this poem as well. So Choices. I go to the mountainside of the house to cut saplings. Saplings are young trees, and clear a view to snow on the mountain. But when I look up, saw in hand, I see a nest clutched in the uppermost branches. I don't cut that one. I don't cut the others either. Suddenly in every tree, an unseen nest where a mountain would be. Okay, might have to read that poem again. I've got an idea of someone is going out with a little axe or saw, and I've only got a couple of minutes to do this, to chop down some trees, but they see a nest in the branches, so they don't cut that tree, they don't cut the others either, and then suddenly in every tree there's an unseen nest where a mountain would be. And this idea of all these nests there, if you chop down all these nests, you don't get to see, so you get to see the view of the mountain, but actually if you leave the nest there, you don't get to see the mountain, but you keep all these beautiful trees alive there. So when we're taking care of things around us, if it helps you with meaning, in Shoulders, it's people we're taking care of, and in Choices, it's trees or nature. And obviously it's Gallagher is the poet in Choices, in Shoulders it's Nye. Now what we quickly need to do is find a couple of methods, 2 to 3 I said here, so let's find 2 to 3 methods in Choices that show taking care of trees. What have we got? I go to the mountainside of the house to cut saplings and clear view, but when I look up, saw in hand, I see a nest clutched in the uppermost branches. I don't cut that one, I don't cut the others either. I've picked out this method. These are what we call, this is weirdly enough a structural technique I've identified, though people don't feel comfortable about it. These are short declarative sentences. Now lots of people just put a full stop there. Well done, you've spotted a method. You need to say why it's important. These short declarative sentences, I don't cut that one. This causes the narrator to change his mind. The narrator changes his mind. Oh, I saw the nest. The nest is what they see, and they stop. They don't cut that one. I don't cut the others either. The repetition, they're not cutting these trees. So I've got repetition, I've got a short declarative sentence as a method in this poem of taking things around us. This idea that we, the reader, can stop and not chop down that tree like the guy in the poem. That compares to, and bear in mind comparison, similarities and or differences, it's not the same because this isn't the same poem, it's not about the same thing. That compares to the man in the poem, the repetition, no car, I don't cut. this idea, the repetition, the short declarative sentence is there, the short declarative sentence is there, so a similar technique they've used but for different effects. In Shoulders, it's to show the father being protective of the son, whereas in this poem, it's in Choices, Gallagher uses it to show that the narrator changes their mind. That's the sort of thing they're after for question 2, and I need to do 2 or 3s. And then suddenly, I've got this short adverb, lovely little fronted adverbial, this idea that the man, the narrator in Choices, I don't know why I assumed male, apologies there, the narrator just basically realises, oh, suddenly, and they kind of see the world around them. An unseen nest where a mountain would be. This idea that kind of nature kind of comes there as well. I'm really struggling to think of other different things. I've got 2 to talk about this poem. 2 would probably be enough in 10 minutes because I can talk about those ideas. I'm going to compare that adverb with the suddenly, with the change in tone of this poem where we've got the road will be wide, the rain will never stop falling. Another point, I might look at saplings. That little asterisk is only there to tell me what that word means in case you didn't know. It doesn't mean it's a special word to analyse, but I'm going to look at saplings as being relatively young trees. So this is a noun choice, and I've got a son asleep on my shoulder, a noun choice there, an innocent sort of noun. And to be honest, in the 2 or 3 minutes you've got to plan this, this has taken me about 7 or 8 minutes in this video, and you will get quicker at it, and also you'll do it subconsciously. Normally, if it was power and conflict poetry, I'd draw a little plan here, but I don't think you've really got the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a different colour, and I'm just going to indicate which bits I'm going to talk about for my answer. So let's have a little look. Obviously, the first thing, I don't really want to do it chronologically. I want to do it in order of what I think I can talk about best. So in Choices, this is what I'm going to talk about first. I'm going to talk about the repetition, the method, repetition, I don't cut, and the idea these are 2 short declarative sentences and they cause the narrator to change their mind. So both poems have got short declarative sentences that cause their reader to change their mind. In Choices, I don't cut that one, I don't cut the others either. These short declarative sentences show how the narrator has stopped and changed their ways, whereas my first bit for question 2 for Shoulders is going to be this 2 short declarative sentences, repetition of no car, but this shows the overprotectiveness of the father. So this guy, I suppose, is being, or this person is being overprotective of nature, this person's being overprotective of a son. That's my first paragraph on both of them. And so in the time I've got, 10 minutes, I don't think it's worth me writing out a little grid. You might want to if you're particularly quick of what you're going to say about this and this one, this and this one, this and this one. But I just say, right, I've got a number 1 there. That's my paragraph for that. That's my paragraph for that. Second paragraph, I said I'm going to look at the adverb suddenly, a method, an adverb there. This idea, just that suddenly, it's had a sudden realisation that we should take care of things around us, even nature. Whereas I said I was going to compare this to this message at the end, this idea that suddenly this isn't perhaps a sudden realisation, or there's a sudden change in the poem, that actually if we don't change our ways, this is going to be what happens to us. So I'm just drawing a couple of little circles around there. So I've got my second paragraph, and that's not as good a paragraph, I don't think, as my first one, and that's absolutely fine. It's sudden there, whereas it's a kind of a deeper message there. And then finally, which I think might make quite a good paragraph, this idea of the noun choice of saplings, or even the verb, the aggressive verb cutting saplings there, just chopping down innocent young trees. Gallagher uses the noun of saplings to show how saplings are relatively innocent and young, and this is something that's happened in this poem, and it's not even something I've kind of explored. I could have the sun is asleep as my paragraph 3, so I've got paragraph 3 there, and my third paragraph here, sun is asleep. I could possibly use world's most sensitive cargo there as well. This child's sensitive there. Don't be afraid to repeat or use some of the quotations you've used here. Then what you've got is you've got about 7 or 8 minutes to have a go at writing up an answer to this. This is going to be time consuming. Your hands will ache if you've done literature paper 1 and 2 properly. Genuinely, some of you will need to work on the fine motor skill of writing at speed, which is just a case of, right, you've got 10 minutes, write as many words as you can, try and beat that. Keep your legibility. Obviously, it's important your examiner can read it, otherwise they won't give you credit. But this is where you go. So look at the question, protecting and taking care of things around us. Both poets, you can use their names, both Gallagher and Nye. I'm going to use that in my analysis. Both poets use repetition to show the mindset of their narrators, and that's not really answering the question, so bring it back to the question. When taking care of others or of nature, because they're trees. This is where I go in choices. Gallagher repeats, quote, I don't cut, and I'm writing quickly here, you can see, so I don't cut, so there's repetition, that's my technique, repetition, I don't cut in short declarative sentences. To show the narrator's change of mind when cutting the trees. They have come to the realization that their behaviour is wrong. Similarly, whereas is quite a good comparative for this middle bit. Similarly, in shoulders, Nye uses repetition of, quote, no car, to show, and I've done my little ellipsis there because we've talked about that already. Use repetition of no car to show the overprotective nature of the father. And then what you might want to do is make a little comparative point about the fact that obviously people are often overprotective of their children compared to nature, but actually we should all play our part in looking after nature. And there you go. So you do 2 or 3 like that. I've not done the analysis of shoulders because obviously it's something we've looked at earlier on. And like I say, 2 to 3 are paragraphs where you compare methods in both poems, and what I'm doing is I'm using terms like repetition or adverb or noun, whatever it is you pick out, it doesn't matter, but you must make reference to a method, whether that's a language method or a structural method, and you must compare the effects of those methods on a reader. So you're talking about what they mean. I don't cut, so they change mind, but also compare the effects. Why is that similar or different in both poems there as well? Just a couple of tips finally. Please make sure you're just spending about 10 minutes on this. In the exam, no one will tell you. I think they'll tell you when you've got about 5 minutes left of the exam, and that might be mostly writing your answer to 27.2, but no one is going to tell you you've got 35 minutes on this question and then 10 minutes on this question. Please make sure you leave enough time to answer the unseen question. You've got 24 plus 8, so you've got a total mark for this of 32, which, you know, that is more than Macbeth. It's more than Inspector Calls, it's more than Frankenstein, it's more than Power and Conflict Poetry. They're all 30 marks, and obviously you get a mark out of 4 for your spelling, punctuation and grammar for Macbeth and Inspector Calls. But please, you know, this is worth 32 marks between these 2 questions. So, you know, there tends to be a feeling of, oh, it's the unseen. Well, you know, we did that last. We've done Macbeth first, so I'm going to spend more time on that. You must make sure you spend 45 minutes on that. Otherwise, you will not do yourself justice as well. And you need to discipline yourself with your timing of saying, right, I've spent 45 minutes on Inspector Calls. I'm going to move on. I've spent 45 minutes on power and conflict poetry, I'm going to move on. And then if you have got any time at the end, then that's absolutely fine. Go back over those other questions, but discipline yourself. Do this as part of your revision, 45 minutes, and then move on, because otherwise you will not be able to access this poem. You'll be rushing, you'll be struggling to find meaning, you'll talk about bits at the start, surface level things, and you won't get much further through. Timing for literature paper 2, Inspector Calls, Power and Conflict Poetry and Unseen is really, really difficult, and you must get that right before you can even have a go at attempting the poems there. And please make sure as well you're not leaving 27.2. Many students just think, oh well, it's only worth 8 marks. That 8 marks could make an enormous difference. Even if you have a decent go at this, you will come out with 2, 3, 4 marks quite easily. So just make sure you're not leaving anything behind. Have a good go. Yes, if you've done this right, your hand will ache. When you put that pen down, for some of you it will be the final English literature question you do in your lives. So make sure it's worthwhile and you leave everything on the answer paper for your examiner to look at.